On a Friday evening, as the sky was shrouded in heavy clouds and a cold wind swept away the last leaves in the city parks, Carlos stood on the train station platform. The antique clock on the wall ticked away the seconds until the train's arrival. It seemed as if the entire world held its breath alongside him. His gaze was fixed on the tracks, which he hoped would lead him to the answers he had sought for so long. Half a century had passed, but Carlos had never forgotten her face, her laughter, or the promises they made, shattered by the war. Carlos was an older man, his hair silver and deep wrinkles etched across his face like the roads on a life's map. He lived in a small house on the outskirts of the city, surrounded by books and old photographs that reminded him of a time when the world seemed full of possibilities. In his youth, he had it all: love, plans for the future, and dreams of a happy life. But the war had changed everything. At 20 years old, Carlos went to the front, leaving behind everything he loved. He was certain he would return, but fate had other plans. When he came back from the war, he learned that his beloved was missing, their home was destroyed, and their dreams trampled. In despair, he left his hometown, trying to escape the memories. He settled in a distant part of the country, found a job that brought no joy but allowed him to survive. Years passed, but the pain of loss remained. Every night, as he closed his eyes, he saw her face, heard her voice, and felt her touch. He tried to build a new life, but no woman could ever replace her in his heart. One winter evening, while sorting through an old chest, Carlos found a letter she had written shortly before their separation. The words were simple but imbued with love and hope. She wrote that she was waiting for him, that she believed in their future, that they would surely be together. At that moment, Carlos realized he could no longer hide from the past. He had to return to where it all began and perhaps finish his story. He needed to know what had happened to her and why she had disappeared. Gathering all his savings, Carlos bought a ticket to his hometown. His mind was filled with questions. Was she alive? Did she remember him? Would he be able to find her? These thoughts tormented him. Yet there was something else, a strange premonition that this journey would change his life forever. He felt that the answer was near, that he could finally find peace. As if guided by an unseen hand, Carlos approached the platform. The train arrived. He took a deep breath and stepped onto the first step. From that moment, there was no turning back. He knew that ahead lay a long journey full of memories and discoveries. But he was ready. This trip was his chance for redemption, for reclaiming what was lost, and perhaps for a new beginning. Carlos settled into his compartment, gazing out the window at the passing landscapes. Lost in thought, he recalled the days when they were happy. A glimmer of hope ignited in his heart, that somewhere out there, something important awaited him, something that would change everything. The old train, with a metallic clatter, began to move, carrying Carlos away from his familiar life. Outside the window, snow-covered fields and forests flashed by, reminding him of the time when he was young and full of hope. His thoughts drifted to the past, to the days when he and Maria dreamed of a future together. Each mile brought him closer to his hometown, to the place where it all began and where it all fell apart. Carlos remembered their first meeting as if it had happened yesterday. He was 20, and she was 18. She was the daughter of their neighbor, and they often crossed paths at the local shop or on the street. Her eyes shone with a special light that made his heart race. One summer evening, they accidentally met at a dance event organized in the park. Carlos summoned the courage to ask her to dance. The music, the laughter, and their first awkward steps, all of it remained etched in his memory forever. From that day on, they were inseparable. Carlos and Maria strolled through parks, sat by the river, and dreamed of the future. They made plans, talked about the children they wanted to have, and envisioned the house they would build with their own hands. Time passed, and their love grew stronger. But fate, it seemed, was against them. When the war began, Carlos was called to the front. He promised Maria he would return, assured her that nothing would change, and that their love would endure any trial. They wrote letters to each other, filled with love and hope. But with each passing month, her letters became fewer. When the war ended, Carlos returned home, but Maria was gone. Her house was destroyed, and the neighbors knew nothing. He searched for her everywhere but to no avail. Eventually, he gave up and left, trying to forget, but her image haunted him all those years. Immersed in memories, Carlos didn't notice as the train pulled into the station. Stepping onto the platform, he felt a wave of nostalgia. Everything around him seemed familiar yet foreign. He headed toward the old house that had once been their shared dream. Now, it was an abandoned lot, overgrown with grass and shrubs. With a heavy heart, he walked down the street where they once strolled, his eyes welling up with tears. Suddenly, his gaze fell on a small cafe that had miraculously survived all these years. It was their favorite spot where they often spent evenings, enjoying coffee and discussing their future. He decided to step inside. The establishment had changed, but the atmosphere remained the same. Behind the counter stood an elderly woman who seemed vaguely familiar to him. He approached the counter and ordered a coffee. The woman looked at him intently, her eyes widening in surprise. "Carlos?" she asked, barely holding back her emotions. He looked at her more closely and recognized Maria's friend with whom they often spent time. "Anna," he exhaled. "Is it really you?" They sat at a table, and Anna began to talk. It turned out that Maria had not disappeared. After the war, she had tried to find Carlos but was told he had died. Heartbroken, she left the city and settled in a small mountain village. Anna kept in touch with her, but over time, their contact grew infrequent. Anna continued, sharing how Maria had lived all those years. She had never started a new family. Her heart remained true to Carlos. All those years, she had kept his letters, his photographs, and her belief that he was alive. Anna suggested that Carlos travel to the village where Maria lived, and he gladly agreed. They set out the next day. The journey was long and exhausting, but with every mile, Carlos felt his heart fill with hope. Anna recounted Maria's life, her resilience, and her faith. Carlos listened, feeling a spark of determination ignite within him. He was finally on the brink of uncovering the answers to his lifelong questions. When they arrived in the village, Carlos was struck by its beauty and tranquility. Time here seemed to have stood still. Anna led him to a small house on the edge of the village. Carlos froze before the door, his heart pounding as though it might leap from his chest. He knocked, and the door opened. When the door opened, Carlos saw a woman whose eyes shone with that same familiar warmth. Maria had changed, but her soul remained the same. They stood there, staring at each other, unable to say a word. Time seemed to freeze, and in that moment, there was no past or future, only the present. Maria took a step forward, and Carlos couldn't hold back. He embraced her, feeling all the years of longing and waiting merge into this single moment. Their embrace was long and tender, and in that silence, more was said than any words could express. After a long pause, Maria invited Carlos inside. They sat at an old wooden table, covered with books, letters, and photographs. In every object, in every corner of the house, Carlos felt her presence, her life, the one he had been searching for all this time. They began to talk, and the words flowed like a river. Maria spoke of her journey after the war, how she had tried to find him, but without success. She told him about the different places she had lived, the work she had done, the new people she had met, but how she had never forgotten Carlos. She shared memories that burned in her heart, and with each story, she grew stronger. Carlos shared his story as well, how he had returned and couldn't find her, how he searched for traces of her in the ruins of houses and deserted streets, how he tried to forget her but never could. He spoke of his pain, how he built a new life but always felt something was missing. In their conversations, there were no accusations or regrets. They understood that time and circumstances had been stronger than them. But now, together again, they had the chance to start over. They looked through old photographs Maria had kept all these years. Carlos saw their youthful faces, full of hope and dreams. Each picture held a story they recalled with both smiles and tears. In these memories were everything: their first meeting, their early steps toward a shared future, their dreams and plans. They spoke of how their lives might have been different if everything had gone another way. Carlos told her about the home he had wanted to build for them, the garden they had planned to create together. Maria shared her dreams of a big family, of children who would fill their home with laughter. But they also understood that life does not allow for what-ifs. Their separation and trials had shaped them into who they were now, and in that, they found strength and solace. After hours of conversation and reminiscing, they began to think about the future. Carlos suggested that Maria move in with him, to his home, where they could start a new life together. Maria hesitated slightly but agreed. They understood that their paths had crossed again for a reason and that they had been given a second chance. They discussed how they would arrange the house and what they would do together. Carlos spoke of tending the garden, while Maria talked about cooking their favorite meals. In these plans, there was so much joy and hope that they forgot the past and thought only of what lay ahead. The next day, Carlos and Maria visited the old cemetery where her parents were buried. They stood by the grave, holding hands, in silence. In that silence was everything: grief for what was lost, hope for the future, and gratitude for being together again. Carlos laid flowers on the grave and said quietly, "We will find a way to honor their memory by living a life that is worthy and happy." Maria nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. They said goodbye to the past, understanding that a new life awaited them. Carlos and Maria spent several weeks preparing for the move. Carlos helped Maria pack her belongings, and every small item reminded her of her past. Old books, photographs, letters, all of it was steeped in memories. They laughed and cried as they went through the old things, and in those moments, their bond grew even stronger. They discussed what they wanted to take with them into their new life and what should be left behind. Some items were hard to part with, but they understood that to start fresh, part of the past had to stay in the past. The day of the move was filled with excitement and hope. Carlos brought the car, and they began loading their things. Maria's neighbors came to say goodbye, and the atmosphere was filled with warmth and support. Many of them knew about her long search and were happy she had finally found Carlos. The journey to Carlos's home was long, but it was filled with joy and anticipation. They talked about their plans, how they would arrange the house and the garden. Carlos shared his favorite places in the city, where they could walk and spend time together. When they finally arrived, Carlos helped Maria out of the car, and together they stepped into the house. Maria looked around, her eyes sparkling with happiness. The house was exactly as she had imagined it: cozy, warm, and filled with love. The following weeks were spent setting up their new home. Carlos and Maria worked together, creating a space that was both comfortable and inviting. They picked out furniture, decorated the rooms, and planned the garden. Every step was filled with care and attention for one another. Carlos devoted much of his time to the garden, planting flowers and trees that Maria loved. Maria, in turn, focused on the interior, making the house warm and welcoming. They cherished every moment spent together and found joy in seeing their dreams come to life. In the evenings, they sat on the porch, gazing at the stars and discussing their plans for the future. Their conversations were filled with so much joy and hope that they forgot all the trials they had endured. Months passed, and Carlos and Maria settled into a new rhythm of life. They savored each day spent together, with each day bringing new joys and discoveries. Despite their happiness, they never forgot the past or those who had been with them during difficult times. One evening, as they sat by the fireplace, Maria suggested writing a book about their lives. Carlos agreed, and they began reminiscing and recording all the moments that had made their lives what they were. In those pages was not just their story, but a story of love, struggle, and hope. Their book became a symbol of their triumph over time and circumstances. They decided it would not only be for themselves, but for anyone who had ever lost hope. It was their message to the world: never give up, and love will always find a way. Carlos, now in the twilight of his life, decides to return to his hometown, where he spent his childhood and youth. At 70 years old, he feels that the time has come to resolve unfinished matters. Maria, Carlos's loyal companion, supports him in this decision. They head to the old family home, which has stood vacant for many years. Carlos had avoided this place for a long time, but now, with Maria's encouragement, he feels ready to return. The house is overgrown with shrubs and looks quite neglected. They carefully open the door and step inside. Carlos remembers running through these rooms as a child, playing with his mother. Every corner of the house awakens memories. In one room, he finds an old photo album. Opening it, Carlos delves into the past, examining pictures of his family. As they prepare to leave, Maria notices a small box tucked away in the corner of one of the rooms. Opening it, they discover a trove of letters and old documents. Among them is a letter written in Carlos's mother's handwriting. In the letter, she speaks of something important she had planned to share with Carlos but never managed to before her death. The letter concludes with the words, "When the time comes, Carlos, you will know the truth." Carlos is stunned. He cannot fathom what truth his mother was referring to. Maria suggests they carefully examine the documents and letters to uncover more. Over the next few days, they meticulously go through all the findings. Among the letters, they find references to an old friend of Carlos's mother, Pedro, who lived in a nearby town. Carlos decides that they need to find Pedro and learn what he can share about his mother's secret. Carlos and Maria travel to the neighboring town. Pedro lives in a small house on the outskirts. When they knock on the door, they are greeted by an elderly man with kind eyes. Carlos explains who he is and shows him the letters they discovered. Pedro invites them inside and begins to share what he knows. He reveals that Carlos's mother was involved in a secret organization dedicated to protecting orphan children. This organization helped children find new families and secured their futures. Pedro shows Carlos and Maria several documents that validate his claims. It turns out that Carlos's mother worked on an important project aimed at rescuing children left orphaned by tragic events. She had planned to reveal this to Carlos when he was older but never got the chance. Carlos is overwhelmed. He never imagined that his mother played such an important role. He feels a deep sense of pride and resolves to continue her work, dedicating himself to helping children in need. After meeting with Pedro, Carlos and Maria return home with a sense of fulfillment and new purpose. However, one thought continues to trouble Carlos. Who else among his mother's old friends and acquaintances knew about her work? Could there be others who might reveal even more? Carlos recalls his mother's old friend, Antonio, who was one of her close collaborators. Carlos and Maria decide to visit him to learn more about his mother's secret life. Antonio lives in a quiet corner of the city, surrounded by old books and photographs. He is delighted to see Carlos, though surprised by the unexpected visit. Over a cup of coffee, Carlos begins to share his recent discoveries and encounters. Antonio listens attentively, then lets out a quiet sigh. "There's much you don't know, Carlos," he says. "Your mother wasn't just a part of this organization. She was one of its founders." Carlos is stunned. He could never have imagined that his mother played such a pivotal role. Antonio begins to recount the story of how Carlos's mother, along with a few like-minded individuals, established the organization to help children affected by war and hardship. Antonio shows Carlos old documents and photographs featuring his mother and other members of the organization. He describes the challenges they faced and the sacrifices they made for the children. Carlos feels immense pride in his mother and realizes he must continue her work. Maria stands by his side, and together they decide to establish a charitable foundation to support children in need. Back at home, Carlos and Maria begin working on setting up the foundation. They reach out to friends and acquaintances to gather funds and recruit volunteers. They name the foundation after Carlos's mother, with the goal of continuing her mission to help children. Their efforts begin to bear fruit. More and more people learn about the foundation and its work, and they receive support from all walks of life. Carlos and Maria feel they are doing something meaningful and necessary. One day, while Carlos and Maria are working in the foundation's office, an elderly man arrives. He introduces himself as Juan, one of the children Carlos's mother helped. Juan shares his story, explaining how her assistance saved his life and how he had always dreamed of meeting the people behind the organization. Juan expresses his gratitude to Carlos and Maria and offers his help in further developing the foundation. He shares ideas and plans that could make the foundation even more effective. Carlos and Maria gladly accept his assistance, seeing in him the continuation of his mother's mission. With Juan's involvement, the foundation becomes even more active. They organize charity events, hold fundraisers, and provide aid to children in need. Carlos and Maria feel they are not only continuing his mother's work but also making the world a better place. Their lives take on new meaning, filled with the joy of helping others. Each day brings new challenges but also new opportunities. Carlos and Maria understand that their journey is just beginning and that there is much work ahead. Carlos and Maria immerse themselves in the work of the foundation. Every morning, they woke up with new ideas and plans. Their goal was simple: to help as many children in need as possible. Around them, a team of like-minded individuals gathered, sharing their passion and drive to make the world a better place. The first few months of the foundation's operations were filled with tension and excitement. Carlos and Maria organized several charity events, which helped them raise significant funds. With this money, they began implementing their first projects, providing assistance to children from impoverished families and orphans. One such project was the opening of a school for children from underprivileged families. The school was not just a place for learning but also a refuge where children could feel safe and receive the necessary support. Carlos and Maria regularly visited the school, talking with the children and their parents to better understand their needs and problems. However, not everything went smoothly. Soon, Carlos and Maria encountered their first challenges. It turned out that many people were skeptical about their work, believing they were simply wasting money on useless projects. Some even tried to hinder their efforts by spreading false rumors and turning public opinion against the foundation. Carlos and Maria did not give up. They continued their work despite the obstacles. They were supported by friends and allies, as well as the children and parents who were grateful for the help they received. One day, after returning home from another charity event, Carlos and Maria were met by an unexpected visitor. Standing at their doorstep was Carlos's old friend, Miguel. They hadn't seen each other in many years, and Carlos was delighted to reunite with him. Miguel shared that he had learned about the foundation's work and was deeply impressed by what Carlos and Maria were doing. He offered his assistance, as he, too, wanted to contribute to such a noble cause. Miguel was a successful entrepreneur and could provide significant financial support as well as his knowledge and experience. With Miguel's arrival, new opportunities opened up for the foundation. They began planning to expand their activities, including opening new schools and assistance centers. Carlos and Maria felt that their efforts were finally bearing real fruit. They decided to organize a large charity gala to draw public attention and raise funds for new projects. The evening was intended to be an important event, showcasing the significance of their work and the number of people willing to support their mission. The charity evening is in full swing. Carlos and Maria, surrounded by friends and supporters, feel a wave of encouragement and enthusiasm. The air is filled with the significance of the moment, and each second brims with hope and inspiration. The music fades, and Carlos steps onto the stage. He prepares to deliver a speech full of gratitude and a call for kindness. But just then, the hall doors slowly open, and an elderly woman walks in. Carlos freezes, unable to believe his eyes. This woman is his mother, whom he had believed to be dead. Her face is gaunt, but her eyes still shine with the same love and wisdom they held so many years ago. The room falls silent, and all eyes turn to her. Maria, sensing the tension, takes Carlos's hand. They walk toward the woman, and as they approach, Carlos begins to recognize familiar features. He realizes there is no doubt. It can only be her. Carlos embraces his mother, tears streaming down his face. She begins to share her story. It turns out that many years ago, she was forced to go into hiding due to threats to her life. She was declared dead to protect herself and her family from persecution. All this time, she had been living under a different name, far from her loved ones. But she had been following Carlos's life. When she learned about his charitable foundation and its success, her heart filled with pride and joy. She decided to find him and reveal the truth, finally reuniting with her son. The hall remained silent, with everyone listening to Carlos's mother's story in rapt attention. Some guests begin to cry, deeply moved by the incredible tale. Carlos holds his mother's hand, feeling the warmth of her skin. He understands that all his efforts and hard work were not in vain. Their reunion was made possible through his dedication and the support of those around him. After his mother finishes speaking, the hall erupts in applause. Carlos and Maria feel an overwhelming sense of support. They realize that new challenges lie ahead, but now they have the strength and inspiration to face them. Carlos's mother joins their noble mission. Her experience and knowledge prove invaluable as she helps them expand the foundation, discover new opportunities to assist children, and provide support to families. The evening continues, but now it carries a new meaning. Carlos, Maria, and his mother feel a profound sense of unity and strength, which drives them to work even harder. Together, they know they can achieve greater things, transform lives, and make the world a better place. Carlos looks at his mother and Maria, filled with gratitude and happiness. Their separation lasted half a century, but a chance encounter changed everything. Now they are together, and no obstacles can stand in their way.